This is going to be James Jackson and Patrick Raymond from Ternary, who are going to talk to us about the full dichotomy of buy and build. Over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for joining us. We wanted to welcome you today to talk through this idea of buy versus build, and we call it a false dichotomy because we constantly engage customers, and we've dealt with this ourselves at scale, on this idea that you need one tool or another to solve your problems as it relates to cost visibility and optimization. We heard earlier in the keynote that this is something that comes up. We heard this in the survey data that there are multiple tools deployed at organizations to solve this problem. And so we just wanted to talk through this today. And we have a couple of guests that are going to be joining us up here as well. I will show you those in a second. Sorry about that. Sorry, just getting used to this. Apologies.
So for this one, yeah, I'm going to put you to work a little bit. Just a quick show of hands. I don't know if anybody's seen this before, but by show of hands, like, who sees a triangle up here? Anybody? How about circles? Anybody see circles? Maybe a star? Yeah, Star David. Okay, well, I mean, we all know that actually none of those shapes are actually up here. So, I mean, we've got a few chevrons and, you know, a couple of sectors, or I guess technically, if geometry fans, major sectors. But, I mean, but really, like, you know, why am I showing you this? Two reasons. One, you know, a lot of things that we see aren't actually there. Like, it's our brain filling in stuff from our experience. But also, you know, with a few simple tools, with those things, you know, you can actually make a lot of things out of them. So, you know, what actually is that simple set of tools that get you to what you want to do, that you can do the most with, but keeping things pretty simple for you? What are those pieces? And that's not what we're going to talk about today.
Awesome. So we wanted to have representation from a number of different sides of this conversation. So myself and James, just to quickly introduce ourselves. I'm Patrick, co-founder of Ternary, and we're not doing sales pitches, so we're not going to go into too much detail on what we're doing here. But James is our head of product, and we're also going to invite up Benjamin, who represents a Fortune 100 company, and we have, just in time, we have Pathik from Google, who can represent the cloud provider side of this conversation. So thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So we're Ternary. These guys are not Ternary, but thanks for joining us on stage. Oh, we got a Pathik.
Thank you.
Here's our agenda that we're going to be walking through here in a couple of minutes. I'm not going to spend any time on this, but we're going to get right into the meat of the discussion. So my previous experience before founding Ternary with my co-founders was we had a simple migration that we needed to do, moving 100 petabytes of Hadoop and containerizing 500 applications in the process in 12 months. We ran into the problem that many companies, if not all companies, go through, which is we didn't really think about the cost aspect. We had a very successful technical migration, achieving that in 12 months, which was impressive. Our engineers were amazing. But what we didn't realize was that we would overspend our budget by more than 2 times what we had budgeted. And it was in the order of around $37 million over budget. So myself and co-founder, who's hiding in the back of the room there, Sasha, were put in charge of rectifying that situation. And so what we discovered was we initially thought, okay, we overspent. That's going to be an easy fix. We'll just go build some dashboards ourselves. We'll tell the CFO exactly what's going on, and then that cost is going to normalize itself. Unfortunately, that's not what happened, as probably anyone who's been through this knows themselves. What really ended up happening was we went through a number of phases of trying to discover the problem. So first, we tried to build it ourselves. Then we tried to buy something. Then we tried to not spend any money and just use the cloud console and use a visualization platform. And none of those things worked. And what the solution for us was, and what we've heard from a number of customers and people we've talked to, is that actually the solution lies somewhere in the middle. There isn't one clear-cut answer to every problem. Each organization has their own issues, their own scale problems, and you can't just solve this by saying, we're going to buy a tool, we're going to build a dashboard. It's a combination of everything. So that was our perspective. I'd love to hear a little bit more, Benjamin, about your perspective and your journey in this space.
Yeah, so, like as everybody kind of goes down this journey initially, you start thinking about, hey, I got one cloud to deal with. Well, one cloud, you got a console that gives you everything that you need. However, when you start needing to expand that and you need more than one cloud, then you need something to kind of consolidate that, right? So we've kind of had, our journey has been a little bit of both, right? Like what is it, to have a tool, to have it as an overlay, and then the other piece is how do we interact with the cloud consoles underneath? Patrick, what's been your experience?
Yeah, tooling is like very near and dear to my heart. Been at Google for 3 years, and I remember some of the challenges that LiveRamp were facing. And to be honest with all of you, right, Google was trying to figure it out as well. Like we were trying to learn at the time. FinOps was hardly coined at the same time. I think one of the biggest takeaways for us at the time was, rather than trying to build features and solutions that matches every need, how about a push for open standards and buildings and things of those nature? How can we make sure that the raw data is available to the customers so that partners and customers who are working on different use cases, multi-cloud, sustainability is a big thing now, tend to build creative solutions on top of it. So I think this completely resonates with me as well from my experience. And I have not a week goes by where customers are like, hey, what tools do we use? And the best answer that I've gotten so far is it really, really depends on what you're trying to do.
That's right. Yeah, and thanks for bringing up the mention of working together on LiveRamp. I think we gave a bunch of people at Google some challenges on how are we going to see our costs, and Pathik was great. We worked with them right in the beginning of the birth of the FinOps era. So
you guys did not shy away from pushing the envelope.
Yeah.
Broke a bunch of things.
Yeah, we did. There we go.
Okay, so as we take a look at this, Ben and Pathik brought up some pretty interesting points, as did Patrick, about, what are those jobs that we're actually trying to do? And so he said, Pathik just said, it depends. What are you actually trying to do? Well, you don't have that build or buy decision. So taking a little bit from, I would say, it's a previous State of FinOps survey, talking about what are those jobs to be done that people are actually trying to do. And you can see some of these things, like obviously at the top of the list, they're getting in the pathway of engineers. How do you get things where it's actionable? But as we look through these, if you look at different solutions throughout the industry, there are lots of these things that people are both buying and building along the way. And so there's obviously options for doing them. So it's not like anything's always cut and dry. There's certainly options for it. So as we take a look at this, Ben, as you look at, are these things that jump out to you as something that resonates with you?
I think like 3/4 of these actually. Just kind of going back to the topic that we're discussing here, like the shared cost, multi-cloud, accurate forecasting, reducing waste, like when you have just one cloud, that can be somewhat easier thing to address. But then when you're trying to aggregate all these into a top level, that's what I guess the end users or engineers are looking for. They're like, hey, what's the total cost? What's the total spend? And then can you kind of drill down into that? And if you're just using one tool, then you end up just telling them, go use a different tool. So the kind of idea is you want to kind of plot that journey for them and say, hey, how are you guys going through the tool, right? Patrick, anything?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of what you said makes sense. That actually reminded me that I met one of the customers, retail customers in LATAM, and it was interesting that they were developing machine learning models, like recommendations for their own workloads while they were running on multiple different clouds. And they're like, hey, here are our 15 models that looks at our technology insight, that looks at our business context, and make these recommendations which are extremely relevant for our engineering team to take an action on. And it took them a while to get to that place because they're like, hey, we are looking into the space to try to see if anyone can really understand our business. And ultimately they had an epiphany that, hey, we know our business the best. So there's a bunch of conversations along those lines. I think reducing waste definitely makes sense, and that was one of the key objectives that the customer had at the time. And that was barely scratching the surface, right? The next step was, okay, how do we operationalize it? Once we found the recommendation, how do we make it real? How do we realize the savings that come out of it? And that's where a lot of human aspect comes into the play, right? It's getting collaborations, getting alignment, getting automation. That's where, like as you were mentioning, right? Like pretty much all of the list here when just trying to make one thing run throughout the organization. So a lot of these kind of make sense, and I've been hearing from my experience that customers are facing.
Okay, very cool. So, yeah, that's all great and everything, and I'm sure you're thinking, yeah, this is great, James. You guys have talked about all these jobs, and so you can do them both ways. But I guess we get to the crux of it is like, how do you actually decide which way to go with these things? So just taking a look here, if we were to plot things out in terms of like build and buy when you want to go, some of the things you have to look at is it's not necessarily like across everything. At different phases, whether or not it's what phase of the life cycle that you are in as an organization towards your FinOps journey, or what in the actual traditional FinOps workflow. Within those pieces, there are lots of different jobs that can happen along the way. So, like in the inform piece, whether or not it's full cost allocation, or if, during the operate phase, it's whether you're getting in front of engineers, those sorts of things. But there are lots of things that you can do along the way. When we take a look at that, some of these things that look at what's in bold here. So in terms of federated organizations, that might move you more towards buying something. So lots of people in lots of places that are going different directions, that want to do things their own way. You need to provide them with tools. Maybe buying makes more sense then. But at the same point in time, if something's very centralized, and you want to actually get in those fine points for your central team, maybe it's okay to build because you only have a limited group of people that are looking at these things. So that makes sense. But as we look at this, I don't know, Ben, is there anything in terms of a pairing that you would think, which might drive you one direction or another when you're looking at a build versus buy decision?
Yeah, I think for us, it was more of a priority, right? Which things were we going to focus on? Now, you guys can go ahead and say, hey, we want to build everything, but then you're going to lose some time there, right? So where we kind of specialized in was on the finance piece. We said, while we're doing, like understanding the finance for the organization as a whole, so that's like multi-cloud rolled up, we're going to depend on other tools to kind of provide us that kind of reporting, right? So that we can better understand it, because we understood at the time that it wasn't our forte. So by leveraging both of these solutions, we were able to build and buy at the same time. Any thoughts, Patrick?
I wondered, and I was we were discussing this yesterday as well, is if this has to do with, where a customer is at from a different journey perspective, right? Crawl, walk, and run. I was just toying with the idea is, do crawl customers tend to gear towards more buying things to see what is out there in the market, exploring the opportunities? Sometimes, customers may not know what they don't know already. And so trying to see what's out there might be a good start. Versus run level customers already have been through multiple different iterations. They have lessons learned. They exactly know what they want for their business to grow. They exactly know how their FinOps team can showcase impact. And maybe, there might be, lesser tools out there which can understand their capabilities and what they need. So maybe they are more geared towards, building something. But definitely not a black and white area, more like a gray thing, like build, buy, augment, as JR was mentioning in the keynote today. So yeah, I think there are a few questions like skill sets you have within the organization, who's your biggest sponsor, how large is your FinOps team. I think these are the questions which could, interesting to see how it would pair between, building or buying the ecosystem here.
Yeah, and I would agree with you there. I mean, that's what we experienced, right? Like we discovered that to the team, that the infrastructure team that was responsible for the spend, it was incredibly important to solve the problem. But when we went to the rest of the product team and to everyone else, there was like, yeah, we heard that's a big problem, and it sounds like you guys are in a lot of trouble, but I can't dedicate any resources to it. So it really does depend. It depends on priorities and resourcing, and also, like, is it your core competency?
That's very true. I was thinking about, like, we spoke with 2 different financial customers, pretty large in US. Both were like hey, we want to automate and innovate for our customers in terms of creating new products, and maybe that's why we're trying to use third-party tools that are out there to help us innovate here in this space. Versus there is another team who have been using third-party tools for a couple of years, and they have been they know what they need now, and are now starting to build certain features and capabilities. Both same verticals, depending upon the priorities and what they need. So yeah, this could completely change in those regards.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, like when we look at this chart right here, L-shaped chart, right? There's a lot of different items here, and you're not going to find any one company can cover them all. All right, so like you want some that can cover some of them, and you're going to take some that you're going to excel and perfect, right? And then over time, as your team grows, you'll eventually get to that perfect harmony.
Yeah, awesome. I just noticed clicking through here that it looks like our slide deck is not up to date, so I have to try and find what we're looking for here. Sorry. Okay. As members of the FinOps Foundation, we're always looking to engage in conversations about these kind of topics, and we're hearing this pretty regularly, that this is something that companies go through, that Google's customers go through, that large enterprises go through, and that we hear from our customers that they need to make these kind of decisions. And so we're proposing a working group to discuss this, and there'll be a Slack channel. Well, it's supposed to be up, but it should be shortly, something along the lines of build and buy, that we'd love to get feedback and hear from people if this is a real need and something that the community would like to discuss. So please feel free to visit us afterwards. We have a booth around the corner. James and I will hang out outside to talk to anybody that's interested in this. And we'd love to hear from the community what the thoughts are around the need for this.
Okay, yeah, so as a quick recap, certainly this is just a snippet. We've only got about 30 minutes here to talk about these, but there are lots of things. We've drilled in on a couple of specific cases of the workflow, and we're trying to bring together perspectives from people that obviously build platforms, people that consume platforms, and then people that actually build cloud services and try and give you the hooks to do what you need to do with those things. There are lots of needs along the way, even if you, just as a nice framework to look at in terms of, like the inform, optimize, operate, in terms of understanding what's going on, coming up with a plan, executing that plan and measuring against it and feeding that back in, or where you are in your journey right now, whether you're just getting started trying to figure out in general what your organization is. There are lots of avenues along the way. And a lot of things that play into it, like what's your focus as an organization? One of the things we touched on, I will tell you, that I've seen before is it might come across as a natural thing, like the design I showed up front. You think, hey, we're a software company, we have software developers, so it makes perfect sense for us to build our own. Okay, that's great, but how do you do that while you're doing your real job? It's like, you only do that during your day job. So that's one of those things that seems like a natural selection, but it's actually probably not such a great idea as it turns out. And maybe not everybody wants to learn that. And so certainly, there's some things that we want to get out of that working group. Ideally, we'd like to have, some documentation, and certainly we'd like to have even a matrix that would help people decide those sort of things along the way. And that's what we're trying to get to. We've got about 11 minutes left here, and so maybe we could open up if anybody has any questions or comments.
Yeah.
You can share that one. Any questions? Can't see.
Stunned everybody into silence.
Yes, we covered it all.
There was literally nothing needed clarification whatsoever. Does anybody have any questions for our awesome panel? Thank you very much.
This came back to one of the first slides I saw. There was a difference between the GCP and AWS issues, like the top challenges. What do you think is driving some of those?
It's a great question.
My personal opinion is I think just at different stages along the way in terms of internal development of tools. And keep in mind, this was in 2021 of the last survey, so things have actually changed. Things are going to continue to evolve. The largest has to do with where people are in their journey with the different platforms, but also where the tools actually exist at that point in time within the two platforms, I think is primarily driving that difference. I don't know if anybody else has a different opinion on that. So,
Yeah, I think that resonates with the cloud adoption journey, right? In terms of like customers who are using AWS might be longer, and they might be facing the challenges which are more, crawl, run, walk and run customers are facing versus on GCP side. But I think what's interesting about that slide is no matter where you are, the spectrum of the problems, as you can map it, it's going to be in the similar spectrum. And this is like an analogy that I like to make is it's a puzzle versus mystery, right? Mystery is something where you don't know and there is no end, whereas puzzle is more like you just need to fit the pieces, but you already have all the pieces in front of you. Just need to put it in the right frame of mind.
Just out of curiosity, do you have any thoughts about that, or just an open question?
It was more of an open question, but if there were specific, I guess, services that folks were using more of, that there was, like if folks who were using BigQuery, they have these sort of challenges, and other folks who are using more Lambda or finding other challenges. I wonder if it's a service-specific thing, but which also coincides with their maturity overall.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Hi, I was just going to say that I'm on the working group for forecasting, and we'll be happy to partner with you because one of my journeys is I'm going to buy a tool. I need a tool to do budgeting, forecasting for my day job, and I'd be interested to see like what resources you'd suggest for like looking for a tool, like what the best resources to do that research is.
Got it. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Before we jump to the next question, I just want to say, like that applies to everyone else in the room, right? Like forecasting is definitely, I think, a community-driven event. Everybody has a different way of slicing and dicing information. I've asked my analyst multiple times to give me the same sheet, and every 2 months it comes out in a different format. Right? Now, I trust him, right? Like he does everything for me, right? But the reality is we need to come up with some sort of standard to help drive this. So I just wanted to put that back on you guys too.
Yeah, and we are interviewing right now some of the folks that are actually at the run stage in forecasting. So we're about to do those interviews and try to find out the journey of, where they were from crawl, walk, run, and get that. And we'll be sharing that back out with the foundation.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just going to follow up on that last question that he has back there on the tool evaluation, and kind of your recommended methodology for that, because there's so many different tools that do different things across the estate and specialize with different providers. So we're looking at trying to figure out that strategy as well, with kind of moving our practice to multi-cloud and figuring out whether we should be doing build, what we should buy, what else should we buy, how do we complement that with what we build?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question for us to answer without giving a sales pitch. So we'll stop there. However, we'd be happy to talk about, I can talk about the previous experience that we had, myself and Sasha, my co-founder, went through this as an infrastructure team, and we went through sort of evaluating the organization like was discussed up here earlier. What is your core competency? What are things that you can apply resources to? And what would you get executive buy-in in order to do that for? And that was sort of where we did not focus at the time. We just went straight in. We said, oh, we've got amazing developers. They're going to knock this out of the park. We've got a PM who's super excited about it. And it just didn't work because we didn't have support. So I think it's such a case-by-case thing, but we'd be happy to talk through how we thought about that previously without talking about our product.
Yeah, so one of the other things I'll add there is, what is the desired outcome, right? Like, what are you guys trying to achieve? If you can have an end state, then you can start plotting the journey. A lot of times, we go talk to or interview an engineer, and he's like, I have to do this every day. And it's like, oh, okay, then what exactly does this produce? And then we work backwards from that, and we say, all right, is there a way that we can do this pragmatically? So my thing is reverse engineer it.
And I want to offer a very generalized approach, irrespective of the vendor. And it's a hypothesis. I'm not saying this is the way to go. But what I've observed from being part of the community is that the native tooling helps when you're at a particular phase, irrespective of the talent that you have on the team, and it's super useful. And then your needs get more sophisticated, and you think, well, I might have software developers, and perhaps I give it that to them. And then you realize, well, you could also drive with your feet, not your core competency. And then you find a solution, and perhaps the solution doesn't give you what you want. And I firmly believe, actually, that the problem is so complex that most solutions will never give us what we actually need to solve this problem. And that's why I believe the last mile is actually on the ground, collaboration, and tooling that you build yourself on top of a platform to solve your unique problem. I think that's the general approach, and that's the hypothesis that I've got.
So I was going to ask, aside from financial, were there ever times that you selected tools that you just could not get rid of, or that you felt like just had no value, but then you were stuck using it?
Good question. Does anybody want to handle that one?
That's probably a time for asking hard questions.
So
Why are we using a tool that we don't provide any value? Yeah. Time to hard questions.
I know of one specific example from a customer, and it specifically had to do with the data retention times within the native cloud platforms versus what the actual tool could provide them that went beyond that. And essentially, they felt data captive to the tool they had purchased. Certainly, that was one of them. Another one, I would say very specifically, an organization that effectively grew up inside of FinOps with a specific tool. And so it essentially become part of their actual baked-in process of the organization. And they had to go and unlearn those sort of things within the team. And it wasn't that they were unhappy with the tool, but they'd grown to the point where they felt like they did really want to customize it around their company processes. And so trying to unplug that tool or effectively replicate a lot of the information from that tool in their own company processes and their custom tools. So those are the two specific cases that I can think of off the top of my head.
I do think I could add to that a little bit. Sasha and I used to discuss all the time the idea of the fallacy of sunk cost. And sometimes evaluating what your long-term costs are for keeping it, even if it's something that you just can't use, significantly outweigh just getting rid of it, right? And so I think we tried to make decisions with all the problems that we had, we tried to make decisions about things that we purchased that were really pragmatic around that. Like, okay, this was a huge contract, and we're probably going to get, wrapped on the risks for doing it, but we need to walk away from it because this is the amount of engineering effort we're sinking into it. We're sinking product effort into it. Our executives are unhappy. Nobody's getting what they wanted. It takes more to manage it and costs more in terms of resourcing that sometimes it just makes sense to just walk away. So.
One other thing I'll just add on there, just apply the FinOps lifecycle to it. I'm pretty sure everybody will understand.
Hi.
Hey.
So we're also in the stage of just evaluating tools and build versus buy. And earlier you mentioned that coming out with like a matrix just to see what's even available on the market right now. It's still pretty early in terms of what features are available. Are there core features that you think should be prioritized regardless of priorities? But if you're in the crawl phase, are there features that you think across all tools these are some that should be prioritized and have been especially helpful to you guys?
In my opinion, part of the question answers itself in the crawl phase. If we think about inform, optimize, operate in the crawl phase, basically understanding what's going on before you start trying to come up with a plan. So part of that visualization phase, like how do you take data and turn it into information? So before you even decide that you want to do something, just so you understand where the money's flowing, where it's going, who's responsible, who do I actually talk to about it. Those are the pieces I would say to start with, because you can build on from there, because until you really kind of understand, and I think that also helps you flush out inside of your organization in terms of, where's this going to stick? Who are going to be the interested parties and the involved parties along the way? If you can actually put information in front of people and find out, where do those follow-on questions, where are those spurred from inside of my organization? Where in the workflow, where can I suss out, where are people's pains during the day? So that inform phase, kind of just visualizing that information, taking the data and turning it into information, that is kind of the key, and that's everything else flexes off of that. So.
Yeah, I think for everyone that's evaluating the tooling, just keeping in mind that it's easy to boil the ocean and try and pick, like James just said, pick one thing at the start. Try to visualize everything that you need to know and work from there, because there's going to be endless avenues for you to pursue, and you'll never get to an answer.
Also, we've got time for one more question. Anybody? Final question? No questions? All right.
Would you recommend
One question.
doing business requirements for your tool, like taking the time and working with the organization and building out some business requirements, so that way when you're shopping to build or buy, you have that?
Sure, yeah. Having a decision criteria makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that, like having the capabilities up front, also having the perspective from different groups, right? Finance and procurement and engineering, oftentimes it happens that only the technical people have say into what the tool is going to look like. But then eventually, 6 months, 9 months down the line, there is a area to like, hey, can we rethink this whole thing?
Yeah.
The other piece that, this is actually fresh because, Bruce, Eric, myself, we were having these conversations. The other thing is like having external ecosystem and how can you integrate your workflows? Because just seeing is one thing, then how do you operate it end to end? So also need to think about the entire life cycle as to how the tool can be used. And then the third piece that I would add is, and I've been seeing this with a lot of customers recently, is they would have different set of tools for their strategic needs, operational needs, and then technical from a team basis. And it's okay to have like more than 2 partners, 3 partners using native tooling, using custom building, depending upon the personas that you are trying to focus on from a use case perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And please express our gratitude to our excellent speakers.
JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.